Did you know that if you breathe at a normal rate and if you live to be 80, you will have taken 672,768,000 breaths? I had to Google that, of course, because I'm not going to do maths unless I really have to. But have you considered that before? That something we all take for granted, something that most of the time we're not even conscious of, keeps us alive, and it's happening, and it will continue to happen until the very end of your life. If we stop breathing for too long and we don't get oxygen, that is the end. And it's literally a vital link between our bodies and the world around us. We take in air, it gives us life, and we breathe out that which is not used. It's an intimate and yet vulnerable process. And it's something that connects us with other human beings as well. When someone struggles to get their breath, I don't know about you, but we can almost feel ourselves struggling with them, even if our breathing's fine. It somehow creates a link between us. My mind goes to the Black Lives Matter movement. So much of the protest centres around that chilling, terrifying phrase that came from a number of black men as they lost their lives, killed by police who were choking them. I can't breathe. Those three words, I can't breathe, became a rallying cry for those people who refuse to stay silent any longer. When you choke one of us, they say, you choke all of us. It's a visceral reminder that we're not isolated units that float through the world disconnected from one another. We belong to each other. We belong to the world. The breath that I breathe in might well have been in your lungs at some point. We are connected on an intimate level. And to see someone being so horribly abused, as in those situations we've seen, it shocks us on a bodily level. And for many people, it was enough to get them motivated to protest. This way of thinking has ancient roots, of course, in our reading from Genesis 2, the second creation story in the Bible. God fashions together from the dust a human being on the earth, and that human lies restless, lifeless on the floor. There was no other life on the planet. Genesis tells us no shrubs or plants, no rain or fields, until God bent down, covered the nostrils of the human, and breathed into that being life, the breath of life. And suddenly the dust took on that life, and the story continues from there. It's a powerful image, really powerful. You can almost hear that deep inhalation of breath as that first human being came alive, as life flowed through the body, and all kinds of other life beyond that human life started to flourish alongside it. And I love this story because it reminds us that God wasn't far off, disconnected from the process of creation, but he was rather intimately involved. He used his own breath to enliven that dust that he had created into a human. If you've ever seen anyone giving or receiving CPR, you'll know just how close and how intimate a thing it is. And God comes and breathes into this human being his own breath. And it doesn't stop there in Genesis 2. As the story continues through the scriptures, one of the important connections that we make is between the idea of breath and spirit. In Hebrew, of course, they come from the same word. They are the same word, ruach. It is the ruach of God that we see hovering over the deep, the waters in Genesis chapter 1, brooding over that shapeless void until the word came forth, let there be light. And it was Ruach that enlivened that creation of God. The dust took on life. And it was the Ruach that rested on the prophets and empowered them to speak God's word to God's people. And it was the Ruach that came upon Mary and turned her womb into the place where the Son of God would reside for 9 months. I wonder if you've ever, in your imagination, thought of those first moments after Jesus was born. I think we tend to idealize that time in our imagination if we ever think about it. We think maybe Mary had a pain-free delivery, that nothing went wrong. The baby just came out and all of a sudden started his silent sleep that the carol tells us took place. But really, when we think about it, that way of thinking undoes some of the core meaning, the power of the nativity story. Because the whole point is that Jesus comes to us as one of us. There's no special treatment. Mary carried him in her womb, and I don't imagine that was without pain and discomfort. And when she was giving birth, I don't think there were some heavenly painkillers on offer to make that process easier. And then the bit that I would particularly like us to imagine, what happened when Jesus was born? Was it silence? Because when you think about it, silence is the last thing that you want in that moment. Everyone in that space would be longing for that child to take a breath and cry. And if the baby doesn't start breathing, and that's when we know something has gone wrong. To breathe is to join the human race in all its beauty and in all its frailty. And you don't need to breathe in the womb. The lungs don't work while you're in there. It's only when you're outside and in the world with other humans that your lungs start to function and process oxygen. And so Jesus needed his first breath, and he would cry like we all cried once we were born. So what does it mean for us to have a God who would endure such an event? To choose to enter this world not by means of a chariot and a red carpet and fanfare, but through the womb and through the birth canal of a young woman. What does it mean for God to now need to breathe? It means, of course, that he shares our vulnerability and our frailty and can truly understand what our lives are like from the inside. We call all of this the incarnation, God taking on flesh. And that is an eternal mystery, one we will never solve or never fully understand. But the important part is we know what it's like for God because he showed us. For him, God taking on flesh was coming close to us to experience for himself hunger and feasting, to know pain and pleasure, to make friends and have enemies, to be busy and to rest. All of those things and more that we human beings think of as just ordinary, normal life. So that when we now feel pain, we know that God understands. And when we're hurt by someone, we know that Jesus has been hurt too. We realize that in our lives today, Christ is present. He is with us. He joins us in the good things and the bad things of life. And somehow knowing that we are connected in that way transforms our experience of life, particularly when we're struggling, It can bring us a great deal of comfort. But it also brings us a challenge. And I think the challenge is quite clear to us. If we are connected so intimately with God, we are also connected intimately with each other. That black man who has the breath stolen from him is experiencing an evil act committed against us all. The grief of that man's family is the grief of us all. Our inaction in the face of such atrocity is injustice. It is a reminder to us of how sin works in our lives. Sin blinds us from our connections to God, firstly, but also to our neighbour. Because we breathe the same breath as our neighbours. They need the same things that we need to survive. Their blood is the same as our blood. We are connected whether we like it or not. And God confirms this connection by joining in with us. He moves into the neighbourhood, as one translation puts John chapter 1. He settles in and he lives with us. So how are we doing with all of this? I think lockdown is a good measure of how we're doing. And in my estimation, lockdown has shown us just how disconnected we really are from one another. I know it myself. I know that I find my life much easier when I don't have to be connected or concerned for my neighbour. When I can take my rubbish out and just let everyone else do their own thing. When I can steal that last parking space in the road, when others perhaps would struggle to walk from further away. In the ordinary moments of life, it's easier for me to live according to my own needs. In so many ways, my life becomes easier at that point. But isn't that the challenge of the incarnation? Not some divine mystery that doesn't really affect us, but that every breath we take is a reminder that I am responsible not just for myself, but also for my neighbour. What I do with my life makes a difference to other people. Will I be a blessing to them, or will my actions make their lives harder? Will I be concerned for my neighbour, or will I just focus on my own business? Will I be conscious of my shopping habits this Christmas, or will I ignore the issue and perhaps unintentionally exploit someone who might be 1,000 miles from me? The breath of life spoken about in Genesis chapter 2 is a timely reminder for us this Advent that we are connected together with God and with each other more than we often realise. So the question really is, what am I going to do with that revelation? Will I carry on life as normal? Or will I pause for a moment and take notice of that breath that I've just breathed to say those words to you? And remember that that breath is a reminder of a connection I have with God and with you and with my neighbour and even with my enemy. As I ask myself those questions, maybe you might want to ask them for your own self too. God bent down, he placed his mouth over the human being's nostrils and he breathed life into that creation. So I pray that you would encounter the God who breathes life into you this week, that you would encounter and reminder that you've been never left alone in this world, but he has always been with you as your breath is close to your lungs. May every breath that you take in be a symbol of that connection you have with God. But may it also bring you an awareness of those around you, prompting you to think again how those connections in your life are really important, and what you do with your choices in your life really matters. So as we walk our walk to Christmas, may Christ, who moved into our neighbourhood, move in your life in a new way. And may he bring with him his comfort, but also his challenge. Amen.